Is Severance really just about a creepy dystopian corporation? Or is it a giant metaphor for how Gen Z and, to some extent, millennials are completely redefining their relationship with work? We've all heard that Gen Z is chasing the dream of perfect work-life balance. But can it really be achieved? Severance, the critically acclaimed Apple TV series, promises exactly that, only with a dystopian twist nobody asked for. In the world of the show, one medical procedure is all it takes to completely separate your job and your personal life with a wall thicker than anything HR could ever dream up. Thanks to a microchip that severs your memories and consciousness, the home you never even thinks about work and is oblivious to the daily grind, while the work you deals with everything job-related. It's a literal interpretation of the boundary Gen Z craves, magnified into a dystopian sci-fi nightmare, and maybe the most unsettling workplace satire we've ever seen. Your outie lives freely, grabs coffee with friends, and never thinks about deadlines or pointless meetings. Your innie, on the other hand? Well, your innie knows only fluorescent lights, recycled office air, and that one stale cup of break room coffee that somehow tastes like despair and cardboard at the same time. It does sound a little bit like an ultimate Gen Z fantasy, right? Perfect separation, the ultimate work-life balance, maintaining your freedom and your right to never think about your job after office hours. Sounds good, right? Sure, if you conveniently ignore the tiny detail that half your consciousness becomes a full-time prisoner of corporate life, clocking in for eternity with no evenings, weekends, or holidays. Just one endless loop of elevator, desk, elevator. That's the dark premise of Severance, a sci-fi drama where work-life balance is taken to an extreme. Hi, it's Captain Spoiler here, overthinking pop culture again. We're about to dive deep into spoiler territory, so consider yourself warned. Severance is the perfect pretext to examine how different generations approach work and what really lies behind corporate promises. The show takes the younger generation's desire for boundaries and pushes it into the most dystopian extreme possible. It's like someone heard, "We don't want our jobs to define us," and replied, "No problem. How about we just trap a separate version of you at your desk forever?" In this video, we'll explore how the show's characters embody different generational attitudes toward work, what happens when the concept of work-life balance is taken to a horrifying extreme, and what this all says about our modern workplaces. We'll look at the paradox of perfect boundaries and why a fantasy of freedom might just be another form of control.
I understand you're confused about the severance procedure. Before we hop on that, let's chat about something I bet you have heard of, the work-life balance.
In the show, Lumen Industries sells severance as an act of corporate kindness. No more emails after hours. No 8 a.m. quick check-ins on your day off. No Sunday night panic spiral about Monday morning. For the outie, it's absolute freedom from the office BS. For the innie, it's, well, hell. All they know and experience is work. Their situation is even more tragic than that of many millennials and Gen Xers of the real world who more or less willingly allowed themselves to be exploited, working to the bone for the company. They at least had a choice. The innie doesn't. And that's just one of many parallels between Severance and the real world. Because Gen Z, the youngest generation in the workforce, seems to be pushing back hard against the old school idea that your job should be your identity. They want boundaries. They want balance. And in their own way, they're already trying to do a softer, safer version of Severance. Surveys from LinkedIn and Deloitte show younger workers are more likely than older generations to turn down promotions if they threaten their work-life balance. They don't see going above and beyond as a badge of honor. They see it as free labor. They reject unpaid overtime, mandatory fun events, and any employer who tries to convince them the company should be their second family. Severance asks an uncomfortable question. What happens if those boundaries become absolute? What if work is sealed off from the rest of life entirely? On the surface, it sounds liberating, but for the you who stays inside, it's a life sentence. The outside self is free from work, but the inside self becomes a slave to corporate demands. Characters like Heliar experience endless repetition and rigid control, which shows that a perfect work-life boundary, if taken to an extreme and facilitated by technology, can produce new forms of confinement.
So look, there is a life to be had here, Helly.
A life to be had?
This is where Severance really shines. It doesn't just give us a creepy sci-fi concept, it uses its characters to explore different generational mindsets about work. Take Irving B. He's in his 60s, representing an older generation raised on the idea that loyalty to the company is a virtue in itself. He takes pride in completing his quota and respects the hierarchy, even when the rules make no sense.
I do think the old photos are supposed to stay on the desk until the new ones come in.
And yet, beneath that surface of discipline and devotion, there's a quiet misery he can't fully name. It leaks out in strange ways, like the dark, endless hallways his Audi obsessively paints at home, as if some part of him knows just how cold and inhuman the system really is. There's also Dylan G., a textbook millennial in many ways. He brags about his achievements and proudly flashes the rewards he's earned for productivity, clinging to the sense of recognition that work gives him.
I've got it 96% sorted, which means I've earned 4 of the 5 tier incentives, including the erasers and the finger traps that you see displayed here. 100% is tier 5. That gets you a caricature portrait. You'll note I've accrued an embarrassment of wealth in that regard.
Wow.
Correct.
At the same time, he's not blind to Lumen's flaws. He even helps Helly figure out how to cheat her way through a break room session, showing he knows how twisted the system really is. But for Dylan, being good at his job and being rewarded for it anchors him to the very structure he sometimes resents. He's adapted, learning to squeeze whatever benefits he can from a system he knows is broken. In that sense, he mirrors a real-world millennial attitude, skeptical of corporate loyalty, but still conditioned to measure self-worth through workplace achievements. Then we've got Mark S., on the upper edge of the millennial range, who initially goes along with the system because, honestly, he's tired. He doesn't exactly trust the corporate structure, but he tolerates it because he's been through too many cycles of instability already. Economic crashes, layoffs, constant reorganizations. For him, keeping his head down feels safer than starting a fight.
So I'll just say that I'm Mark, been with Lumen about 2 years, and I absolutely love this game.
Nice try, pal, but you said that last time.
Yet, when Helly enters the picture, Mark begins to shift. Her defiance stirs something dormant in him, sparking flashes of memory and the realization that maybe endurance isn't the only option. In Mark, we see a millennial who has long accepted compromise until the spark of Gen Z rebellion inspires him to imagine change. Finally, Helly R., clearly Gen Z coded. From the moment she wakes up as an innie, she questions everything. She refuses to accept the terms of her employment and sees the entire setup for what it is, a cage.
Hey! Open the door! Hey! Let me out!
Unlike the older generations, she doesn't try to endure or make the best of it. She rejects it outright. Her panic and resistance in early office scenes dramatize what many young workers feel, being trapped in jobs that demand loyalty without offering purpose. What's more, her refusal doesn't just shape her own story, it ripples outward. Helly's rebellion inspires Mark to wake up, nudges Dylan to push further, and even forces Irving to confront truths he's long suppressed. She represents the power of Gen Z's uncompromising stance. Not just to resist, but to inspire older generations to rethink the rules they've lived under for too long. Watching them interact is like watching a microcosm of the modern workforce. Older generations quietly enduring, millennials half resisting, and Gen Z walking in on day one and asking, why are we doing this at all? It's not just that Gen Z hates pointless rules, they also hate pointless work. And in Lumen, that's basically the whole job description. At Lumen's macro data refinement department, the employees don't even know what their work does. They're just sorting numbers on a screen based on the feelings they trigger. No context, no impact, no meaning. In surveys, Gen Z workers say they want jobs with a clear purpose and alignment with their personal values. When work feels meaningless, they disengage fast. That's part of why they're accused of quiet quitting, which is really just doing what the job description says. No more, no less.
Sometimes I ask people to sculpt how they feel out of clay. Would you like to do that?
One of the most eerily accurate things about Severance is Lumen's fake corporate warmth. They talk about being a family. They have these forced morale-building rituals. They hand out bizarre prizes for productivity. And in the real world, that "we're a family" line is a classic piece of corporate BS. Companies say it to make you feel emotionally tied to your job, but it often means they expect you to work harder, accept bad conditions, and put the company's needs ahead of your own. Gen Z's not buying it. Surveys show they're the least likely generation to believe in loyalty to a company for its own sake. They'll change jobs if the work environment is toxic or even just unfulfilling. They don't care if you call it a family. If the vibe is off, they're out. But at Lumen, you can't get out. Ever. Unless your Audi lets you, which they almost never do, since they have no idea what their innies are going through. Lumen keeps its workers in a state of forced productivity. If they're unhappy, make mistakes, or show signs of disloyalty, like wanting to quit, they're sent to the infamous break room, a place everyone fears. The name is misleading, yet fitting. It's not where you take a break, it's where your spirit gets broken, alongside with any desire for resistance. Inside, innies are subjected to a mix of psychological manipulation and coercion, forced to apologize over and over for their so-called failures until they finally believe they've wronged the company. At the same time, Lumen goes out of its way to look like it cares about employee well-being. They hold so-called wellness sessions that, on the surface, seem professional, but in reality, offer little more than empty gestures. Instead of genuine support, innies get scraps of information about their Audis, hollow praise, or vague advice dressed up as wisdom. It's corporate care as performance, designed not to heal but to keep workers compliant and hopeful just enough to keep going. It's not far from how real-world corporations adopt the language of self-care. Think beanbag chairs, free pizza, or mental health Mondays, while still expecting you to burn yourself out the other 4 days of the week. For Gen Z, who value authenticity and mental health, this fake concern is a red flag. The Lumen office becomes a satirical mirror of real-world corporate culture, with its endless motivational slogans and wellness programs that feel artificial. When the Lumen workforce starts to rebel, management pretends to listen, offering superficial changes that look like employee-driven improvements. This feels eerily close to what happens when modern companies suddenly listen to their workers. They'll make tiny symbolic changes, but never address the deeper issue, that the system itself is broken. But Lumen doesn't just control its workers through policies and punishments. It also wraps itself in the language of faith. The company feels less like an employer and more like a cult. It has a patron saint in Keir Egan, whose words are preserved in a kind of corporate scripture. Employees memorize his aphorisms, recite his rules, and treat his image with reverence, as if he were more than human. The workplace itself becomes sacred ground, where rituals replace genuine community and obedience is framed as devotion.
Progress, knowledge, show no fear. Here, chosen one, here.
It's a disturbing exaggeration of how, in the real world, some corporations also push their employees toward a cult-like loyalty, whether that's chanting company slogans, glorifying the founder, or adopting a mission that demands near religious commitment. Severance takes that idea to its logical extreme, showing a company that doesn't just want your labor, it wants your worship.
Am I dead?
No.
This isn't like hell or something?
No.
Then why the fuck can't I leave?
Here's the paradox. Millennials and Gen Z want work to be just one part of life, not life itself. They don't want their identity defined by their job title. They want flexibility, purpose, and mental space for the things that actually matter to them. In Severance, the procedure promises exactly that. Audis get to live unburdened by work stress. But the price is that your innie, an equally real version of you, is condemned to endless labor. It's the ultimate cautionary tale. You might escape the grind, but only by creating another you to suffer it forever. What makes it even more cynical is how corporations co-opt social issues for profit, sometimes pushing products that dress up as solutions, while they're often part of the problem. It's like those beauty brands selling body positivity lotions after years of promoting unrealistic standards, or companies hawking feminist-themed apparel while their executive boards lack any female representation. These performances of corporate compassion distract us, make us feel seen, while quietly padding the bottom line. And if a company senses Gen Z's hunger for true work-life balance, you better believe someone will eventually sell a severance chip disguised as liberation. And here's where it gets even creepier. This isn't as far-fetched as it sounds. Scientists have already experimented with selectively erasing memories in animals, like snails. And researchers are developing brain-computer interfaces that could one day manipulate memory or consciousness. We're nowhere near severance-level technology yet, but the building blocks are quietly stacking up. At this point, it's probably just a matter of time. The show is, in this sense, a cautionary tale. The desire to separate work and life completely could backfire spectacularly if the technology existed, turning freedom into confinement. Imagine a future where a frustrated employee, tired of endless Zoom calls and meaningless tasks, is offered the chance to just not think about work ever again. Would some people say yes? Absolutely. Would they realize the full cost? Probably not, until it was too late.
I can sense that the questions made you feel afraid or disoriented. Well, the good news is you're at an orientation.
The reason Severance resonates isn't just its mystery or world building. It's because the world it depicts doesn't feel like science fiction. It feels like an exaggerated version of what's already happening. Long hours, busy work with no clear purpose, a lack of agency over what you do and how you do it, corporate cultures that pretend to care while quietly squeezing every ounce of productivity from their workers. Millennials have learned to compromise with it, but Gen Z is still fighting it. And it's not yet clear how this fight will end, whether they'll successfully drive real change, ultimately adapt like the generations before them, or if their pursuit of a perfect work-life separation will inspire some cynical corporation to package and sell it back to us. And that's what makes Severance so compelling as an allegory. It's not just a story about splitting your work and home life. It's about the risks of letting someone else define where that line is drawn. Because in the end, freedom at work, or from work, isn't just about time. It's about control over your own life. And if you give that control away, even in the name of balance, you might just find yourself living in a world where half of you never leaves the office at all. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to subscribe. And if you enjoyed this video, you'll love this one next.